Is the sound working okay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I also want to thank all of you who are involved in the Rachel Carson Center just for creating such a vibrant intellectual space. I'm very excited to be here through the fall semester. Is it too loud? I can hear an echo. Is that better? Okay. I'm very excited to be here through the fall semester, and I'm hoping that what we start today will be the beginning of a conversation that we can continue. I'll be here until the beginning of January. So to give you a little bit of perspective on where I come from, this is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. It's a part of Cornell University. It's also a separate nonprofit organization with members from all over the world. And our mission is to interpret and conserve the natural world. The education team that I work with has 3 major roles. One of them is to work with school teachers all over the country and increasingly in other parts of the world as well, writing curriculum and holding professional development workshops to help teachers learn to teach in new ways. Another thing that my team does is online courses and webinars and programs for the general public, again, all over the world. And then the third thing we do is welcome visitors to the Lab of Ornithology. You all should come visit. We have a visitor center. We have 65,000 or so visitors each year, and so we have exhibits and tours and programs for them. So the part that I'm going to be talking about primarily today is the work that we do with teachers. And when I talk about teachers, I mean not just in school, it's also out of school, primarily elementary, middle, and high school ages. So covering the whole realm. Whoops. So I want to escape from what I just did. I want to start with a story. 10 years ago, I went to a conference, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Wangari Maathai. A couple of years earlier, she had won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in Kenya, helping people to get started planting trees. And she was the first environmentalist to win the Peace Prize. It was very exciting that she was recognized for her work in human rights and how they related to environmental quality. So she talked about how she grew up in rural Kenya and then left her hometown, went to the city, got a degree, started her career, and later in her career learned from women who were still living out in the countryside how difficult their lives had become because they were spending all day looking for water, looking for food, and looking for firewood. So she looked into it, and she found, in fact, that the place where she grew up had become pretty barren. And it wasn't because large industry had come in. There was some farming and ranching, but a lot of it was from people on a day-to-day basis going farther and farther afield to gather food, firewood, and water. So she decided that if this was being caused by individuals, that individuals could also make a difference in turning the situation around. She got people started in planting trees, nurturing them, growing them, at a time when it was quite politically incorrect, especially for women, to be doing things like that. But she persevered. She kept going with getting more groups going. And eventually it spread around the country. And then over a couple of decades, it spread around the world and eventually led into the United Nations program to plant 1 billion trees. This was in 2008. It's gone way beyond that by now. So at the end of her speech, there were 12,000 people or so in the room. She had complete silence. Everybody was listening to every word. And she said she did not start out to create a movement. She started out to plant a few trees, and look what had happened. And she encouraged everybody in the audience to think about small things that they could do and how they too could make a difference. And together we could build a better world. As soon as she stopped speaking, the place erupted in conversation. And the man who was sitting next to me, who I'd never met before, said, "Well, that changed my life." And I asked him what he meant, and he said he's a pipeline engineer living in Texas, and he never really thought very much about the environment, and she had just got him thinking, and he didn't know what he was going to do, but he was going to go home, and it was definitely going to make changes in how he related to the environment. So as an educator, that was a really powerful moment in that lecture hall, and what I wanted to do is figure out, how do I capture that? How do I make that sort of thing happen for children in classrooms all around the United States or all around the world, some of whom will never get to travel to conferences or to other countries? What kinds of experiences will wake up that sort of environmental stewardship feeling in them? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of curriculum that we're working on and how that relates to that question. So I work closely with teachers, and we have several goals in the kinds of lessons we create. One of them is that students will learn science, because most of the teachers I work with are science teachers. So obviously the lessons have to be related to the science that's in the standards. But we also want the students to grow in ecological awareness and in stewardship values. And finally, I would like them to become aware of conservation-related careers. And this doesn't mean that we want them all to become conservationists, but one of the things that I've learned from working with teachers is that students, even the ones who get very excited about the environmental work that they're doing in middle school and high school, typically have no idea that they can do things like that as a career. So we decided they needed some role models in conservation science. And when I walk around the halls at the Lab of Ornithology, I'm blown away by the exciting things that graduate students are doing all over the world. So we put together some vignettes of several of those students and put them up on the web. Each one has 3 short videos, and then things like Google Earth tours or other things that introduce students to the kinds of research that these graduates are doing in different countries, different kinds of organisms they're studying. And they also talk about why they're doing what they're doing, what led them into that, and what they hope to do future in their lives. Another thing that we're doing with our lesson writing is getting students involved in citizen science. And I know that that's a term that has different definitions in different parts of the world. What we're talking about here is research collaborations where the public can get involved with professional scientists, and the data gets accumulated into a central database that can be useful for professional science and for the participants. So one example is eBird. I think it's probably one of the world's largest citizen science projects. Anybody, anywhere in the world can observe a bird or a bunch of birds, record their observations, and submit their data online. Collectively, this is what it looks like. That's a map of the world made up only of eBird observations that have been submitted. So the brighter it is, the more checklists that have been submitted. You can see we have checklists from every country and 99% of the world's species. Clearly there are some big dark areas there where we need to do more work, getting more people out, watching birds and submitting data. I was very excited back in 2012 when we were celebrating the 100 millionth observation that was submitted. It was actually submitted by a 12-year-old boy from Canada, and the bird observation he submitted was a very common one. It's the American robin. So I think that really proves that eBird can be for everybody. It's a very powerful database now for scientists, and it also has online data that you can use for your own birding habits and also that teachers can use for teaching science. So we've put together some curriculum related to that, some books to help teachers teach with citizen science, sometimes using our bird citizen science projects, but also other ones that go on way beyond birds to elephants, whales, butterflies, flowers, etc. The point is that we want teachers to realize how powerful citizen science can be and how it's not too difficult to incorporate into their teaching. Here's a quote from one of the teachers we work with. Citizen science gives students the ability to participate in science, to know that their observations count for something. So I think anytime students are doing something that goes beyond their own classroom, it becomes more real. And citizen science is a powerful way to do that. At the Lab of Ornithology, we have a program called Bird Sleuth, which is designed to work with educators. And sometimes they're not always people who like birds or like being outdoors. So we start with that nature connection, trying to make it easy to get outside and do simple things, playing games and that kind of thing. And for some people, that can lead into participating in citizen science. And I want to say that citizen science it doesn't solve all the issues, because you can collect data, submit it to citizen science, and then you think you're done. But that's only one part of the scientific process. So what we're trying to do is get teachers to go way beyond that and to have students asking their own questions, thinking scientifically and thinking about investigations that they could do to address their own questions. And that can involve citizen science. It doesn't have to, but citizen science can be a good way to get people observing and thinking about data, and then that can help generate those scientific questions. It can be really challenging for teachers because many teachers have never been scientists. They've never done research projects themselves. So we've put together a set of lessons to guide students and teachers through the process of designing and conducting an experiment. It's a free download from our website. And then we also have an online course that teachers can take so that they can go through the process together of doing a scientific investigation and also reflecting with each other online about how to use that in their teaching. A lot of people assume that these research projects are only for high school students or college students or graduate students, but in fact they can be done at any level. One example is, this was a third grade class in New Jersey. They put bird feeders outside their classroom window and nobody came. And the teacher said to the class, if you were a bird, what would make this place more attractive to you? So they brainstormed and they drew pictures and they added water and flowers and shelter and habitat. And they planted a bird-friendly garden. And now they have that space and they can watch it from year to year, and hopefully more birds will be coming. And then they can use earbird to track that also over time. Another thing that we do is publish student work. We've done this for the past 20 years. Each year, once a year, we publish a publication called Bird Sleuth Investigator. Teachers and students send in their work, and you can see it's art, it's also poetry, and it's also the results of scientific investigations. These are a free download from our website, and you can also purchase them in printed form. We find that they greatly boost, obviously, the self-esteem and self-confidence of the students who are published, but they're also a great motivator for other teachers to see, students did this, maybe my students could do it too. So I want to stop here for a minute and summarize a bit about what I think helps to inspire student learning and action. One is providing role models. Certainly, Dr. Wangari Maathai was a serious role model for all the people that were in the room that day. Rachel Carson is a powerful role model for this whole center. And then the conservation scientists who we portrayed on the web are young people closer in age to middle school and high school students who we intend to be good role models for them as well. I think another thing that's necessary is stories of success. We've all, every day, hear stories of doom and gloom, but one of the things that makes role models so powerful is they are role models because they have succeeded in doing something exciting, whether it's planting a lot of trees or banning pesticides or smaller things that we all can be doing in our own careers. And then finally, getting students involved in action, whether it's citizen science or conservation projects like habitat improvement or scientific investigations. So I want to turn now to talk about how I got from there to here at the Rachel Carson Center and the project that I'm working on here. Several years ago, I was invited to be a faculty member with a group that takes about 30 North American teachers to the Peruvian Amazon for 10 days each summer. And they invited me to come along to help with the bird part of that program. I said yes, because it sounded like a grand adventure. And I truly enjoyed spending 10 days in the rainforest with a group of teachers totally immersed in the woods and in the water. We observed birds, we submitted data to eBird, and just reveled in the wonderful place that the Amazon is. We also spent a day doing community service, so working in one of the small villages in the Amazon. In this case, we were painting a school. And then another cultural piece was to meet with one of the indigenous groups, and they were dressing in the way they used to dress and presenting some of the crafts that they still do, but are based on their traditional ways. And this was fascinating, but I found it not very satisfying, because I wanted to know, what is it like for people right now living in the Amazon in these tiny remote villages? What's it like to live in a home like this and to have this be your primary source of transportation? So I really wanted a chance to get to know people that are living there now. A couple years ago, we had the opportunity to meet the man on the left, Dr. Michael Gilmore. He's a professor at George Mason University in the United States, and he had done his doctoral research living with a very small group of indigenous people called the Mayahuna. They earlier were called the Orojones, or large ear people, because of the wooden discs that they wore in their ears. They no longer do that, and they prefer to be called the Mayahuna. So they're very small. They're fewer than 500 people. They're spread across 4 communities deep in the Peruvian Amazon. And Mike Gilmore lived with them while he was doing his dissertation research on ethnobotany. He got to know them very well, went out and mapped the forest with them. And he also saw them go through some really troubling, hard times when their land was being overrun by loggers and poachers. Here's a quote from one of the community leaders. The loggers demolished everything, the woods, the animals, the fish. They even hunted frogs. We were left with nothing but our hunger and our poverty. So he helped them to form a federation, which gave them some power on the federal level. And then in 2015, a large chunk of their ancestral homeland was designated as a regional conservation area, with them empowered to take care of that land. So that was huge good news. One of the things they decided is that they want to welcome visitors onto their land. They want to teach them about the rainforest and about how they live there. So this was a perfect opportunity for us to work with them to help them create a small, sustainable ecotourism kind of business that would help them continue living the way they want to live, and also support the kind of educational experiences that we were trying to provide. This past summer, for the first time, we were able to take a group of teachers and a group of college students into the Mayahuna lands. They welcomed us warmly, took us out in the fields, showed us how they grow things, what they're growing, how and why, and then some of the new conservation practices that they're just started implementing. The man on the left here is showing us a beehive, which seems everyday to us, but their common practice had been to cut down the trees to harvest the honey. And that's true all over the remote parts of the Amazon. So they're learning how to cultivate bees in hives, and these are stingless bees, so they can actually keep the hives in or near their homes for a sustainable source of food and income. The man on the right is climbing an aguaje palm tree, again to harvest the palm fruits. And the typical practice in the Amazon is to cut down the tree just to harvest those fruits. So the palms, which are a very common species, are becoming less and less common because these fruits are so desirable. So they're learning to climb the tree and are very proud of the fact that they are now taking really good care of their forest and not cutting the trees down. Oops. So they were happy to sit around and meet with us, with the teachers and with the students, to discuss their livelihoods, to discuss what their hopes for their future are, how they're managing the forest. And it was a really fruitful time for me to be sitting with teachers and thinking about how do we take these experiences back to the classroom. Some of these teachers will be able to come back to the Amazon, bringing groups of students, and that obviously is ideal, but not all of them will. And so we're also trying to create lessons that will have some of this personal impact for people who will never have the chance to go there. So these are the kinds of questions that we were delving into with the teachers. Why does the Amazon rainforest matter to us, whether or not we will ever visit? How do our lives influence the sustainability of the rainforest and the livelihoods of the people who live there? So we're continuing to work with some of the teachers who are there next summer and new teachers who are planning to come there last summer and ones who are coming in this next summer, looking at some of the lessons that they already do. Most, at least in the United States, most students in middle and high school learn about the Amazon, but they learn about it from a textbook or from lessons like this one where you're looking at your ecological footprint. You're probably all aware of this kind of graph. It shows that in countries like where we live, in the United States or here in Europe, our lifestyle uses more than a single planet for us to survive, compared with in Peru or in the larger Amazon, most of South America, where it's the other way around. The capacity of the land exceeds the ecological footprint of the people who live there. Well, you can think about that on really theoretical terms, or you can think about it in terms of how we live and how they live, and are there differences that we could make in our lives that would help with this equation. So I want to put this a little bit in the context of the academic literature. There was a paper that came out in Science magazine in 2014 that talked about how we need a convergence between science education and environmental education. As science education in general had steered away from the human element. It was strictly about the science of the natural science and physical science of what's happening in the environment. And environmental education had tended to be more advocacy-based, more the human element, sometimes single issue-based. You learn about something because we want you to change your behavior about that issue. And what these authors were recommending is that we needed to have a new focus, bringing together science education and environmental education with the goal of developing people's capacity to think critically, ethically, and creatively in appraising environmental situations, to make informed decisions about those situations, and then to develop the capacity and commitment to act individually and collectively in ways that sustain and enhance the environment. So I think that summarizes really well my goals and the reason I'm bringing some of the human element into these scientific studies and science classrooms. A more recent paper by a professor who was studying youth involvement in citizen science came up with several processes that she said foster environmental science agency. And so that by agency, she means building the capacities, the skills, the awareness, and the confidence that you can become an agent of change, actually do something positive for the environment. So the processes that she found to be important were: one, doing science that is real, with rigorous data collection and analysis; two, disseminating your findings to real audiences; and three, investigating complex social ecological systems. So the work we've done so far with teachers, I think, shows that those do ring true. Here's a quote from one teacher: "Having students analyze human impacts around the world and at home helps them see what they can do to change the environment for the better." Another said, "The most exciting aspect is connecting my students to issues they need to understand as they become world citizens." So these are both quotes from high school science teachers who are teaching science with pretty rigorous standards for the science content that they need to teach. But they're telling us that including the human element in it is making it more relevant and real for their students. So I want to go back for a moment to that moment at the end of the conference with Dr. Wangari Maathai. And you remember I was pausing to figure out, like, what did she do in that room, and how could we capture some of that and make it into something that we could make accessible to more people around the world. And pondering that, I decided there's several powerful things that she had going on there. One is that she's an amazing role model, and it was because she had been such a success, but she could stand up there with passion and humility and speak from the heart about the problems that she'd seen in Kenya and then the steps that they'd taken to overcome them. It was a really good news conservation story. Everybody felt really good about what an amazing thing she had accomplished. And it also, she had lots of ideas about ways that it can translate into what we could do in our own lives. So what I want to do is take that sort of experience and use the Mayahuna people as that sort of role model, that sort of good news conservation story, and actions that we all can implement in the Amazon or wherever we live, and see if we can't create those sorts of transformational experiences for students, whether or not they have the chance to ever make it to the Amazon in person. So with that, I would really like to turn this into a conversation. This is a room full, an amazing room full of people who are passionate about the environment, and you've come from a lot of different countries, and you represent a lot of different academic backgrounds, and I'm really curious about what is it that motivated you, and what would you say would be best for motivating a broader range of society. So I've posed a couple questions here for discussion. They're just meant to be suggestions. You can certainly come up with others on your own. And so do you want to say how long we have for discussion and what the process will be?
But first of all, let's thank Nancy for